and welcome our new and wonderful, I want to say, new superintendent of public instruction, as the title goes. We know it as education here in North Carolina. So, Ms. Truitt, I will say she's a mother of 3 wonderful children and started her career in education as a high school English teacher in 1994 after graduating from University of Maryland. And she taught for over 10 years in classrooms until Governor Pat McCrory appointed her senior advisor in 2015 and also honored her with the highest honor in recognition of her efforts to improve public education with the Order of the Long Leaf Pine. But she's also served as chancellor in the Western Governors University in North Carolina. She's board of the Tammy Lynn Center and the board of Nurse Family Partnership. And as you know, she was elected now in November 2020 to be our superintendent. She will head the public education in North Carolina in the next 4 years. And we're here to hear her and see how we can support her initiatives. But we're also here to celebrate what the LIBRE initiative, this thing, and LIBRE Action does for us all. This organization empowers every person to take part in the direction of our nation, making private initiatives become a reality. As such, private individuals have contributed to make a reality these things. So in 2018, we were able to cap down our income tax from 10 to 7%. That came from, well, not just us, but it came from this initiative. We also got or advocated for the confirmation of justices to the Supreme Court in the last 2 years and to the Washington, D.C. Court of Appeals as well. We also worked earnestly to get Senator Tom Tillis reelected. And as he said, he's very much due to this grassroots effort. If anyone here has an idea of his own, wants to put it in practice, bring it over. That's what we're here for. And if anyone is concerned here about the direction of our state and our nation, jump on board. We need you. So, and there's LIBRE's volunteers around here. Well, they don't have the distinction I wanted them to have for you so that you can recognize them, but most of you have already registered in the front desk. But we are now working on these projects. We are working for the SAVE Act. So the SAVE Act is an alternative, or rather it's an act to reinforce, to make telemedicine a permanent option instead of just a relief during the COVID emergency. We will also work for the TABR, which is a taxpayer Bill of Rights. If this, although this is a local effort, if this act passes, it will have a repercussion in the rest of the country. And we're also working to defend the freedom to work, the right to work. Because you probably don't know, but there's already in the US Congress a bill that will force every citizen to become a member of a union in order to find a job or work. That for some or many of us, or the majority of us, is unacceptable. At least that's what we think in LIBRE. Anybody wants to work to prevent that from happening? Here we are. And the way we do this, and I won't stay long talking about this, is from the bottom up. Well, to start with, the ideas come from the people. So, and then what we do is make them possible through grassroots efforts, which means going to persons one by one, whether it is in the street with a flyer, whether it is over our automated system where we can reach by text, calls, or even patch people through their representatives. So last year I was in my backyard in Raleigh, calling people in Alaska and connecting them to their senator in Washington, D.C. This is technology. We make it possible, and this organization puts those resources to us. We empower the individual to participate in the lawmaking process as well. So please bear that in mind. And when you ever think, what can you do for our country? Here is an option. I'm not saying it's the only one, but I'm surely telling you it's good. What can you do for your country? Call us and we'll help you make it a reality. And we work this way individually, but we also join efforts with other organizations to do the good. That's what we call coalitions. And here tonight is Gil Pagan. He is the head of Hispanos del Sur. And if Gil, you want to say something to us here, please do. And then we will leave you with Cesar Grajales, who's the national spokesman for LIBRE, to further introduce Ms. Truitt. Thank you for your patience. Come on.
Thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Gil Pagan. I'm director of Hispanos del Sur, which means Hispanics of the South. We're a Hispanic grassroots outreach and engagement firm that does community work, fills events, makes calls, and performs door-knocking campaigns to engage the community to become active in state policy decisions that affect their families, work, education, taxes, their safety, and the local economy. We advocate and work with like-minded partners, the LIBRE initiative, to remove barriers to economic growth, choices in education, and removing any impediments to freedom for those living in the South in particular. We want to thank the LIBRE initiative for putting on this event in partnership with Hispanos del Sur for their work in defending and fighting for all of our freedoms in this great state of North Carolina and our great nation. We're glad to come alongside of you, mano a mano, brazo a brazo, to get our common message out to the immigrant communities as a whole and to the Hispanic communities in particular. Give it up for LIBRE Initiative for putting this event together.
So next, Cesar, please.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you all for being here tonight. Oh, this afternoon is a beautiful place. It's actually my first time here in Raleigh. What a beautiful place. Buenas tardes. I heard people y escuché gente hablando en español allá atrás, así que buenas tardes. So I think Richard said many things about LIBRE, but let me say, we are also a resource for our community with information and events like this, but also many other events like how to open a business, ESL, English classes as a second language. I'm not a teacher, as you probably noticed my accent. You're probably wondering what states this guy. No, I'm coming from Florida, but I was born and raised in Colombia. So paisa. So we have many types of events and things that we do at the LIBRE initiative, but we also engage in a different range of topics, such as increasing school options from K to 12, reforming the criminal justice system, cutting taxes, cutting the red tape for businesses, etc. But today we are here to talk about school options in North Carolina. What a beautiful state. And for that, we are honored tonight to be joined by the 24th Superintendent of Public Instruction for the North Carolina, Mrs. Catherine Cook.
Muchas gracias, Cesar. Thank you all so much for coming out on this beautiful evening. Can you hear me okay? All right. So thank you so much, Richard and LIBRE, for inviting me to join you this evening to talk about something that I and you all as well believe is so important and crucial in our state and our nation right now, and that is education. As Richard mentioned, I am a former teacher, and I have worked in education my entire adult life. And a couple of years ago, some folks came to me and said, we would like for you to run for Superintendent of Public Instruction. And I thought to myself, there is absolutely no way that I am going to get involved in politics. I've never run for anything in my life before. And although I had worked for a Republican governor, I really did not want to live in the space of the politics of education. However, sometimes God has other plans. And that is exactly what happened. I found myself deciding that I was the right person at the right time. And so I launched my campaign. I want to talk for a second about the Department of Public Instruction and what I do in the space of education. Because most states do not elect the person in my role. And most other states call this person the Secretary of Education, for example. And so I think it's important to understand first that our state constitution calls for a state board of education whose members are appointed by the governor, and they are appointed for 8-year terms. So we elect our local school boards. Those who serve on local boards of education are elected, but the governor in North Carolina appoints the state school board members. And then our state constitution calls for a state superintendent of public instruction who will be the head of the agency that does the work on behalf of the State Board of Education. And there have been many lawsuits over the last 10 years about this tension of powers that exists between the Department of Public Instruction and the State Board of Education. And the last 4 years have been marked by one of those lawsuits. And so there was a lot of infighting between the previous state superintendent of public instruction and the State Board of Education, which really did not lead to better outcomes for kids, which is why those of us who work in education do so. We work in education because we want to see the best outcomes possible for children. And Democrats and Republicans don't always agree on the best way to achieve those outcomes in education. So right now, we have a State Board of Education that is made up predominantly of Democratic governor appointees. And then we have a state superintendent who is a Republican. And so the extent to which I can get my agenda through and get things done is largely dependent upon my ability to work with a Democratic-controlled State Board of Education, a Democratic governor, and a Republican-controlled General Assembly who make laws in North Carolina. And so when the General Assembly decides to make and pass a law, it will often direct the State Board of Education and the Department of Public Instruction to make that law a reality. And right now we are in a long legislative session that began in January and hopefully will finish by the 4th of July. That will give us our new budget for the biennium. And my agency has about 560 people, and we have about, including federal dollars, a $14 billion a year agency. So it's a rather large endeavor. And we try, as is indicated on LIBRE's banner behind me, limited government. We want to, I have to balance trying to keep a lean organization, because it is a government agency, with balancing the needs of districts. Now, I do not have a vote on the State Board of Education. And so when there are matters that come before the board, I can express my opinion, but I do not have a vote. Also, I do not have jurisdiction over local superintendents. So we have 115 local school districts and 215 or so charter schools, and they all have their own boards. Even a charter school has its own board. And so, as I mentioned earlier, our local boards of education, those folks are elected, and the local superintendent reports to that local board of education. And it's the local board of education who can decide to renew a contract for a local superintendent or fire them. And we have quite a bit of turnover with superintendents in North Carolina, by the way. The average local superintendent serves for about 18 months. So those relationships between local superintendents and their boards are also very important. So the collaboration that we've seen so far with the State Board of Education has been definitely an improvement over what we've had the last 4 years. The leader of the state superintendent, who is like the CEO of the agency, which has about 560 people in it, must be able to lead a large organization, again, while also collaborating with the State Board of Education and the General Assembly, as well as the governor's office. And there are definitely challenges. We have a lot of challenges in our state right now. The largest challenge I submit to you is the fact that 67% of 8th graders in North Carolina do not read nor do math proficiently when they start high school. That, my friends, is what I would consider the largest civil rights crisis of this century. That 67% of our students cannot read nor do math proficiently when they start high school is unacceptable in this state and in this country. We know from the pandemic, from testing that occurred several months ago, that 75% of our 3rd graders are not reading on grade level due to schools having been closed. And so we have a lot of work before us. And that work will take the form of a strategic plan that my team and I put together that will put early literacy and supporting students to become proficient in reading moving forward. This act was supported by legislation from the General Assembly, mandating that all teachers receive training in what is known as the science of reading in order to equip teachers with the skills they need to be better instructors of early literacy. There is an incredible amount of money coming in to states from the federal government right now. Not all states are like North Carolina with a strong rainy day fund and a strong tax base and good conservative economic principles. There are many states and cities that need a bailout, and that's exactly what the Biden administration is doing right now. However, North Carolina will still receive its share of the American Rescue Plan, which for public schools is billions of dollars. And so I am currently working alongside my team and our General Assembly to determine the best way to use these dollars to support struggling schools. Struggling schools are a big part of the problems that we need to solve for. We have approximately 478 chronically underperforming schools across our state. And these schools are plagued by multiple problems. And sometimes we have families who, because of their zip code, are forced to attend their neighborhood school. And that is where the charter school movement comes in. Charter schools are public schools that receive funding from the state and are schools of choice for any student who wants to attend that school. Sometimes charter schools provide transportation and free lunch, and sometimes they don't. But most charter schools have a plan for how to support low-income students. Charter schools have flexibilities that traditional neighborhood public schools do not have. And charter schools are politically fragile because Democrats in leadership tend to not support charter schools because they feel that charter schools are taking money away from public schools. But I say that charter schools are public schools because they are public schools. And also that school choice is a fundamental principle that needs to be protected. And by the way, 67% of registered Democrats in North Carolina support school choice options. And so this is a challenge that is coming from elite Democratic leadership who choose teachers unions over what's right for public schools. School choice is not about protecting, should not be about protecting the system of education. School choice is about giving parents options besides what the government tells them by virtue of where they live, they need to attend that particular school. Now, there are not always a charter school near where a family may live. So what other options would a school have? Well, that's where opportunity scholarships come. Opportunity scholarships are a voucher worth a few $1,000s that a family can use at any private school, including religious schools, that accept these vouchers. And so if I am a family trapped in a neighborhood failing school, and I do not have money to pay tuition at a private school, I can apply based on my income and the needs of my child. I can apply for an opportunity scholarship. And the General Assembly, again, led by Republicans for the past several years, has, with each budget, increased the amount of money available for those opportunity scholarships. I believe that the invitation that was sent to you all talked about the future of public education. And I do want to say a few words about the future of public education, because I do believe that we are on the cusp of seeing something very different in public education. Let me be very clear. I am a proponent of public schools. I am also a proponent of school choice, and they do not need to be mutually exclusive. Those two things can coincide because I am a proponent of children. And what's right for one child is not necessarily right for another child. And I think what the future of education looks like, and I thought this even before the pandemic, but I sure do think it now, parents are paying attention more than ever before to what is going on in our public schools. Parents are aware more than ever of indoctrination that occurs in their students' classes. They are aware of when teachers have low expectations of their child. but they're also aware of all of the wonderful things that many teachers are doing to support their children on a day-to-day basis. But my point is this: public school proponents must start viewing parents as the consumer. And that is, I believe, not how most people who work in public education view the role of the parent. They do not trust parents to make choices that are right for their children. And they do not see that their role is to serve parents and their families. The best districts that I have been to are districts that embrace all school communities. So in other words, if I'm a local superintendent with 20,000 students enrolled across my K through 12 schools, I should be reaching out to charter school leaders. I should be reaching out to homeschool families. I should be reaching out to those who work in private schools, because we all need to serve the students in a community. And there are superintendents who are doing this in our state. I've met with them, I visited their districts. They know that what's important is serving a student and their family within the community at large. And that in the long run, that's what's best for their district. Many of you have approached me this evening and shared some of your lived experience. I've met people tonight from Chile, from Russia, from China. On the campaign trail, I cannot tell you how many people I met from Venezuela who shared their lived experiences with me and their concerns about what they're seeing in curriculum in our state. And what I would like to say is that in my experience, people who don't understand why critical race theory is antithetical to those values that we all cherish about our country is that they don't know what Maoist China is like. They don't know what communist China is like. They don't know what socialist Venezuela is like. And it's up to us to help people understand why critical race theory is so damaging to all children. When I was 18, my parents, who were very traditional, did a very non-traditional thing. They allowed me to go and live in Germany for a school year. They made me apply to university first, and then they allowed me to defer my acceptances. And I got a job as a nanny with a family, which was a very unusual thing to do back in 19. And I went and lived in Frankfurt, Germany for a year. And I happened to be in downtown Frankfurt in November of 1989, which was the month that the border fell. And I witnessed firsthand East Germans pouring into West Germany and heard stories that I will never forget, and saw people reunited with their families. And so I know how dangerous critical race theory is. What we are seeing happen in our districts right now is a matter of local control. In North Carolina, the State Board of Education adopts our academic standards And then by statute, we deploy local school districts to enact those academic standards. And so curriculum decisions are a matter of local control. And so a school board can adopt whatever curriculum it chooses, provided that board votes on that curriculum. This means that a teacher can decide that they are going to infuse pieces of critical race theory in what they teach. And it is up to first the principal of that teacher, once a parent complains, to decide how to handle that situation. And then if the parent is unhappy, the parent must then decide whether or not they want to lodge a complaint with the superintendent or go to the Board of Education. But this is why it is so important that people who do not want this in schools are part of grassroots efforts to elect people to local boards who will not approve of curricula that embodies this. The State Board of Education, even if it were controlled by Republicans, would not be able to prevent a local district from adopting a curriculum that we may find offensive. So I share this with you because it's very unusual that I meet someone who understands the way this is laid out in our Constitution. In February, the State Board of Education adopted a new set of history standards. And those standards are supposed to be rolled out this fall. There was a timeline attached to these standards set by the General Assembly such that the incoming group of freshmen would have the personal finance and economics course completed by the time this incoming freshman class coming up this fall graduates from high school. And so right now, the legislature is trying to find a solution to those standards, but that solution rests with them. And I look forward to supporting the legislature to the best of my abilities and to following the law, whatever law is passed. Let me just close by sharing with you that the way forward, as so many of you have shared with me tonight, is to love one another. This month is National Poetry Month, and the great American poet Walt Whitman, when he wrote Leaves of Grass just before the Civil War, there was something on his mind. He felt that one of the biggest threats to the American democracy was American hatred of other Americans. Very, very telling in the late 1850s. And so I encourage all of us to love one another, to collaborate with one another, to listen to one another, and do such good works as he has prepared for us to do. Thank you so much.
Superintendent, thank you very much. That was a fascinating story, and thank you for inspiring all of us tonight. I want to invite Richard and Tyler to the stage. We're going to start with the Q&A. Tyler is the Deputy State Director for AFP. AFP is Americans for Prosperity. That's part of the LIBRE. Well, LIBRE is part of the organization. We are the Hispanic arm for American for Prosperity. Superintendent, you touch many topics. We're gonna deep a little bit here, but let me start with asking you, many counties in North Carolina are experiencing a decline in enrollment in public schools. Do you think parents are losing faith in public school options? If so, how we can fix it? Let me give you the microphone.
Apologize.
Thank you so much, Cesar. We are experiencing a decline in enrollment across our state pre-pandemic, primarily because people are moving out of our rural areas into our urban areas. And so for the past 20 years, North Carolina has experienced incredible growth, most of it in migration, people moving here from other states. And in fact, before the pandemic, our workforce needs were not going to be able to be met just based on the number of people coming into our state from other states. And so therefore, education leaders said, well, we really need to ensure that we are educating all North Carolinians. We've been able to meet workforce demand because of all these people who move here from other states. We have to start educating our own people. And the charter school movement started to grow at that time, providing families an option. But we also need to continue to improve public education, traditional public education as an option. So yes, I do believe that school choice is part of the solution, but we also need to continue to improve our literacy rates in our state.
Thank you. In light of this comment, let me ask you, Richard, about this. You are in the community and every day working with the community, many events, talking to everyone. What are you hearing the most from your activists regarding what they are looking for in education opportunities for their kids?
Well, okay, thank you, Cesar. Yeah, what I hear a lot is that parents want to have more options to choose what best fits their children's education. And for example, one person in particular would tell me that he would love to see loosening restrictions to establish charter schools and expanding them. It's only, I think, 6% now of the actual students in the whole state that are in charter schools. And as you said, there are also—
Richard, I think you have to get the mic a little bit closer. You guys can hear in the back? No? You can hear me? Can you hear me?
Use your teacher voice.
All right. So I was saying that what parents in our LIBRE community here in Raleigh, which is ever growing, we still wanted to grow more. And but the one thing that I do hear is that they would like to have that parents have the right to choose where their children go to their schools or their educational opportunities, and to, in that sense, that restrictions be loosened, all this red tape for charter schools to be established and developed, and expanding the opportunity scholarships as well. That's the two things that I mostly hear. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Superintendent, I have another question. This is very important. Pay attention to this. Thank you, Richard. The Department of Public Instruction reported in December that we don't know the location of 10,000 students What goes into finding these students who, not fault of their own, cannot be in school? How do we ensure that we can provide proper education in accordance to the North Carolina Constitution for the mandatory education? Where are those kids and how we can help them?
Yeah, that's an incredibly important question. So many of those children are kindergartners who were supposed to enroll in kindergarten last year, but their families did not because of the pandemic. So we're hoping that we will see an influx of first graders enroll. But also there are many high school students who actually, when school shut down in March, they dropped out of school and got jobs. Either because they needed the income, or because they, in some cases, parents said, you're not going to sit around and do nothing, go get a job. And so we are working with our local superintendents to put programs in place so that individual schools can start calling and going to homes and trying to find these lost, it's mostly seniors. And we want to bring them back so that they can graduate from high school.
Thank you. And I think this question is either for you or for Tyler, but I think it's Superintendent. I'm gonna ask you both. 21% of students were failing at least one class before the pandemic. That's a crazy number, but pay attention to this, because during this pandemic, 53% of the students were failing at least one class. So that number increased. How can we make sure that we catch all the students up while improving the innovative ways to get below the pre-pandemic 21%?
Yeah. And 21% is way too high. That's an incredibly high number. And honestly, it's because kids cannot read proficiently that we have that many students failing courses. And if you talk to an employer, for example, who is hiring kids out of high school, they can't count money. They have trouble writing. We have to do better. What I would say is that my office has created something called the Office of Learning Recovery. And we are responsible for, like I said, the hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to be coming through the agency, both to stay at the agency for programs as well as going into the districts. They are just printing money in Washington, D.C. right now. And so we have to accept the money. So we are going to do the best we can with those resources and make sure that we are supporting districts with programs that work, with programs that will get kids caught up and allow them to accelerate.
Thank you, Superintendent. And I think to improve education in students is also a partnership with the parents. I think the parents have to be, invest a lot of time with the kids to make sure that they really succeed in school. So I want to ask this question to Tyler.
Sorry, I wanted to make sure we were jumping ahead.
Yeah. So this question is for you, Tyler, actually. So we know LIBRE and AFP are active working in, not just in North Carolina, but we are pretty much in what, 32 states across the nation, working and trying to expand educational opportunities. What is LIBRE North Carolina and AFP North Carolina currently working on that helps empower parents to have more say-so in their kids' education?
Thank you. And I want to kind of relate this question back to the last one. Superintendent Truitt was talking about learning loss is a real issue. You guys, we've seen this over the last year plus now, and our students are getting left behind. And if we don't address this now, this is going to be a generational issue. The students who are being left behind now, their kids are going to have to deal with this, and their kids' kids are going to have to deal with it. This is going to affect generations of North Carolinians. So what our community, with LIBRE, with AFP, what we'd like to see is not one plan for that. We'd like to see hundreds of thousands of plans for that. Plans that are brought about by parents that are best fit for their own kids, because that's where the real kind of decision-making should lie with parents. And we understand that the state has a big part to play in that. There are roles for public schools. And I love what Superintendent Truitt said before. We want public schools to succeed. Every single person in this room should want public schools to succeed. We also want to see private schools succeed. We want to see homeschool parents succeed. We want to do this because we want kids to be able to self-actualize in the best way that suits them. So when we're talking about learning loss, I think we need to look and start this in the household. Look at the families, look at the parents. They're going to know what works best for their children. So let's look at how we can get some of this money. We're looking, AFP, LIBRE, we're looking at innovative ways that we can take some of this money, because when Superintendent Truitt said they're printing money up in DC, she's not lying. I mean, we're talking about money that would just kind of make your eyeballs shoot out of your head. It's just a ridiculous amount of money. We need to get this money into the hands of parents, because kids can learn in multiple different places. They can learn in a brick and mortar school. Some kids probably thrived on a Zoom screen. Some kids will thrive at a summer camp. Some kids are going to need tutoring. There's so many different options, and they're mostly local. Like we look at this, we talk to legislators, we talk to parents from all over the state. There's so many great local options, like local camps, like local tutors. We need to utilize these things, because if we don't, kids won't be caught up. And we're going to have to deal with this problem. And this generation's kids are going to have to deal with these problems, because these kids aren't proficient in reading. They're not proficient in math. And if we don't figure out a way to get the power back to the parents, we're not going to solve this problem. So that's what AFP, LIBRE, that's what our community is doing, is we're looking at how we can look at this last year. There were failures. We all know there were failures. We weren't prepared going into this. And how could we be? Nobody knew a global pandemic was going to hit. How do we learn from this in the future? How do we best empower parents and best empower kids to learn to the best of their ability? So whether that means we look at the opportunity scholarship in the state. Right now, that's limited to 133% of the free and reduced lunch program. That's still, it's a large number of kids. We could grow that. We could look at more kids being able to access some of these dollars that the state has and find schools that better fit their needs. But at the end of the day, what we need to look at is kids and how they best learn. And that's going to be individual. And we're going to need the parents. We're going to need the parents to step up and look at this and help us. Because when I said we won't survive this with one plan, we're going to need hundreds of thousands of plans across the state that's going to be individualized to each family.
And I think it's our responsibility as citizens to keep the government accountable for all this money that each state is receiving right now. It's at millions of dollars. So Superintendent, let me ask you, we hear all the good things that you're doing in the office right now, but what are some of the biggest barriers the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction is in providing education to the 1.5 million students in North Carolina? What are those biggest barriers that you're facing right now?
Bureaucracy, that's the barrier. That's always the barrier to get things done. Too many cooks in the kitchen. In education, there are special interest groups. I'm not going to lie. And it's a little bit different because we are, everyone does have a genuine heart for kids. But like I said earlier, how we get there can vary. And what we prioritize can vary. And I would say that the politics of education can be a barrier. And trying to, if you try and please everybody, you'll please no one. Right. That's a hard lesson to learn. And I have, I'm elected, but my team is not elected. And they are oftentimes caught between the politics of education without intending to be. But again, I would just say that it really is bureaucracy. We've got so many great things going on right now, so many people willing to fight this good fight. And where we always get tripped up is in the bureaucracy.
And at the LIBRE initiative and AFP, we are doing everything we can to cut all that red tape that is making it difficult to people to have access to many services. So this question is for you too, Superintendent. Right now, actually, you cannot touch this at the end of your speech, but for the people who is in the back and for the Hispanic community that is here right now, Hispanic North Carolinians are embracing the Opportunity Scholarship. What is being done to extend this program to reach out more Hispanic families, but also how can they apply to this scholarship?
So the General Assembly is working on legislation to increase the income threshold so that more people can apply, can qualify.
Right now, what is the income threshold for the
It's
family?
133% of the, I don't know the exact dollar. Do you know the
Okay.
dollar amount?
Yeah, it's about $64,000 for a family of four.
Okay,
$64,000.
$64,000 for a family of four. Now, the Opportunity Scholarship is about $5,400, I believe. Yeah, and so it's that could be enough to pay for a private school, depending on the community. But other types of private schools, it's not nearly enough. So it's a great question of how do people find out about these scholarships? And honestly, there has to be a grassroots movement to share with the Hispanic community what the scholarship even is and how to apply for it. I mean, if you just Google North Carolina Opportunity Scholarship, the application will come. But it's a matter of how do we ensure that everyone who would be interested in this knows how to find it. And there's not advertising for it. So we need groups like LIBRE and Españoles del Sur to help spread the word.
Thank you. And in light, thank you for that answer. In light of that answer, Richard, let me ask you. I have to ask you, my friend. I have to ask you. So how the activists and the volunteers and the Hispanic community that is right now here can partner with LIBRE, how they can reach out to you and partner with LIBRE and AFP?
I mean, how?
Yes.
We already took care of that because when they came in, they signed in and I have all their emails and I'll reach them all and their phone numbers and whatnot.
Does that mean that it's a follow-up of this and then trying to continue giving them information that will be valuable for the community? Richard?
What's that again?
Is that mean that these people will be receiving emails and phone calls from you with,
They're going to be doing grassroots efforts. They're not just going to get an invitation. They'll be there. Right, Kevin? Well, kidding aside, what is grassroots? The grassroots we do is to have everybody that volunteers in this reach out to everybody and move them to take action. And I just mentioned a while ago, I called somebody in Alaska to get in touch with their senator in DC. That's technology, but the real heart of this is one-on-one. So if we go back to the 1900s, I don't care. So how did we do that? Well, we would just go on the street, hand out flyers, yada, yada, yada. That's the heart of it. Talk to people. Today, we have technology. So we do the same thing, but through phone calls, texts, knocking doors, etc. Well, we also knocked doors in the 20th century. But this is the important thing that we need to know. It might sound that all these efforts are not impactful. Oh yeah, here you come again. Let's go out and knock doors, and what is that good for? And blah, yeah, and so on. But I'll tell you why it is important. Two reasons. We don't live in a monarchy. We live in a democracy. And in a democracy that has an election system like the one we have. That election system is very much handled through the grassroots efforts on how we reach one by one to get them to vote for one thing or act for another. It's not an option. That's where we live. And if we don't make decisions, if we don't take actions, hey, somebody else will. And that's what's happening when we see, like I saw in Venezuela, that you saw changes coming and you couldn't do anything about it. We can stay back in our house and complain, rightly complain. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but we can also take action. And we should and we must. And here we are, guys. And I will try to reach out to as many people as I can here tonight, as I have been in the last years and will in the next, hopefully, to make things happen. And you can be part of it. I need you to be, well, not me, the country needs all of us. So I don't know if that answers.
Perfect. Thank you, Richard. So we were planning to get some questions from the audience. Unfortunately, we're running out of the time. So I just want to say thank you, Superintendent, for joining us today. This has been a fascinating conversation. And thank you, Richard. Thank you, Tyler, for being part of this too. What were you saying? Sorry?
I need to give some awards. Is it time for that?
No, yeah, I'm gonna
Okay.
hold your horses. We're getting there. We're just saying thank you to the superintendent for this. I just want to ask you for a round of applause for her. Thank you very much. And thank you, Tyler, also for being part of this conversation. Yes, Richard is going to give some awards to the activists that have been part of LIBRE for many, for a long time. So, Richard, the stage is yours.